Yeah, so a very warm welcome to today's Heidelberger Salon Digital. I'm Alexandra Kämmerer, the head of the Max Planck Institute for Comparative Public Law and International Law's Berlin office. And we are streaming today from our office really at Gendarmenmarkt in the heart of Berlin, where we hope to be able to welcome all of you very soon again. And I'm pleased that we have today also the occasion to celebrate and mark the publication of a new book, Defending Checks and Balances in EU Member States, edited by Armin von Bogdandy, Piotr Bogdanowicz, Canor, Christoph Grabenwarter, Maciej Taborowski, and Matthias Schmidt, which is just out with Springer early this year. And we will take this opportunity to discuss the themes and topics of this book, but we would also like to take the opportunity to discuss the underlying issues, the questions of liberal democracy and of that very holy trinity, as Joseph Weiler has named it and labeled it in the introduction to this book, the holy trinity of democracy, human rights, and rule of law, which is at the very core of the concept of liberal democracy. And for any of you who have ever engaged with Christian theologies, it will be quite familiar that the idea of Trinity, of the Holy Trinity, is a dynamic concept and a relational concept which lives off communicative aspects. And it's also a very fragile and delicate concept which needs balance and constant rebalancing. And the theme of today's salon starts from the observation that some of the balance behind the concept of liberal democracy and the reality of liberal democracy and liberal democracies within Europe might be disturbed. And we will discuss today whether there's a need to rebalance it and how this could be done. And since this is a topic which is not only of relevance and of salience within Europe, but also in many parts of the world today, I'm very pleased that today we have also a large number of participants from many parts of the world joining us for today's seminar. I would like to present to you, first of all, today's speakers. The panelists today are, first of all, two of the editors of the book who will introduce this book, which is also available open access, and you can see in our announcement for today the data to download it openly accessible. Piotr Bogdanowicz and Armin von Bogdandy will introduce the book and also the two conferences and meetings that led to this publication taking place in Warsaw in late 2017 and also at the Wissenschaftskolleg, the Institute for Advanced Study in Berlin in early 2019. So Piotr Bogdanowicz and Armin von Bogdandy will introduce this volume, and then we will have further statements by Adam Bodnar, whom I warmly welcome, András Jakab, Justyna Łacny, Joseph Weiler. And then we will hopefully have plenty of opportunity for further discussion. And we invite all the participants in the Zoom meeting to join this discussion. Then later on, we will now ask you to turn off your cameras if you are just a participant, not the panelist for this first part. And then later on in the discussion, we will ask you to give us a sign in the chat, to put a 1 into the chat if you want to ask a question, and put also your name, and then we will make you visible for the discussion. But without further ado, I now would like to invite Armin von Bogdandy and Piotr Bogdanowicz to introduce this wonderful book. And I've seen that Armin von Bogdandy has also a copy with us, which he will certainly want to share on the screen.
Thank you very much, Alexandra, for that. Let me start with some personal statement. When Maciej Taborowski told me in summer 2016 that there will be a chance to cooperate with Professor von Bogdandy and his team, I was, of course, excited. And the source of this excitement was twofold. First of all, the chance to cooperate with Max Planck Institute, but also it was the second source, and this was the chance to discuss the rule of law issues. And let me recall you that at that time, in the middle of 2016, or even when we held our first conference in the middle of 2017, the situation was much different. As regards Poland, we have had some first trials of, I would call it hostile takeovers of judiciary. There were some first main problems revolving around the Polish Constitutional Tribunal, but we were ahead of the Court of Justice judgment in so-called Portuguese judges case. We were ahead of any infringement proceedings. We were ahead of any new laws on the Supreme Court. Nonetheless, we thought that it would be interesting to look at this the rule of law issue, and we started preparations to the first conference to be held between Max Planck Institute and Warsaw University. And this first conference took place in September 2017, and it was, I would say, a good venue for discussions amongst different scholars. There were some established, well-known scholars, but there were also some younger scholars, all of them discussing different topics. We were not focusing on an individual topic, but we were discussing the procedure under Article 7. We were discussing infringement proceedings. We were discussing the charter, or the chance to bring the case concerning the rule of law via a preliminary reference procedure. And then, after this conference, we continued our cooperation between Max Planck Institute and Warsaw University. In summer 2018, we organized together a debate at the via Verfassungsblog on LM case, and at the beginning of 2019, the second conference in Berlin was held. And the book, which will be shown in a while by Professor von Bogdandy, is the outcome of this events. In a nutshell, it was divided into three parts. The first one concerning the understanding the development in EU member states. So it is of some introductory nature, and then we discuss on more detailed issues like European action and the issues around European arrest warrant. So these were the topics that were discussed in the book, and on the basis of which today's discussion will be held. I would like to thank you, Max Planck Institute, for this chance, and Professor von Bogdandy personally. And I now give floor to Professor von Bogdandy, wishing all of you a fruitful discussion.
Thank you very much, Piotr.
Yes, so hello everybody. Welcome also from my side. First, I would like to thank all authors and all co-editors for the effort that you have put in the book. It took a while, it took some patience, but now it's out, and I think that we can be happy with the outcome. Indeed, I saw just a short while ago, I saw that Edith Zeller, and that is the president of the European Association of Administrative Judges, a very active group in defending the rule of law. She has circulated the link to our book, which is open access, as you have heard, among all the members of her association. And she sent it around with a vivid recommendation. And I think that is wonderful. I think we can be very glad with this promotion. Now, this is not just a moment to celebrate, but I think we should take the occasion of this meeting also to think ahead. And in that respect, I want to share a thought with you, and it is a reflection on the title. So here you see the book. Again, it's free online, but as it is free online, it's also very cheap to buy. I think it's less than 40 euros, and it's a hardcover, beautifully done. So if you're thinking about a nice gift, think about that one. So you see, and what I want to tell you, it's a reflection on the title and how to move on. So the book comes with the title, Defending Checks and Balances in EU Member States. We choose checks and balances because that makes the core point more clear. Very often there's talk of the rule of law, that how it has been framed. But many citizens, they think that the rule of law is just the trouble for lawyers. It's not really engaging for them. So we thought that the title Checks and Balances makes the real issue more clear, more visible, and that is constitutional democracy. Now, the focus of the project that we started in 2016 is expressed by the very first word, and that is defending. That is how we looked at the issue 5 years ago. But now, 5 years on, and after 2 Polish elections that have been confirming the trend, I think we need a further perspective to fully address the issue ahead of us. Now, what has happened? Well, on the one side, we have seen that the EU has started reacting to the developments, but we also see that the Polish side has hardened. So my idea is that beyond defending, it's also about transforming. More concretely, I think that to defend EU principles, some basic structures of the Polish society need to be transformed in light of EU principles. That is the core idea. To truly defend the EU, there needs to be transformation. So there is this further perspective, and that is a perspective which is called transformative constitutionalism. That might be a paradigm to go ahead. It's a famous paradigm. It has been developed for South Africa under the Mandela Constitution. But then, and that is very important for us, it has been taken up in Latin America. In Latin America for a big reform project that came after the fall of military dictatorships in the 80s. And there in Latin America, it's a regional and multi-level phenomenon. So it's not too different to what we have here. And indeed, Paul Sonnevent, who is with us today and who has contributed to the book, Al wrote already in 2016 a great contribution that shows how and why the paradigm of transformative constitutionalism holds promise for understanding and addressing the developments in Hungary since 1989. And I built on his contribution. So what does that perspective add? In a nutshell, it helps us understanding the true challenge, but it also helps us calibrating our expectations as well as the legal instruments, and thereby to better defend the checks and balances. Now, what is the core idea of transformative constitutionalism? The core idea is that there is a rupture or a trauma in a society, and after that rupture or trauma, a society lays out the basic principles how it wants to evolve. And I think that is pretty clear how that happened after the fall of communism in Poland and in Hungary and in many other countries. And it were the principles of liberal constitutionalism. And they were entrenched both at the domestic level and at the supranational level, both in the Council of Europe and in the European Union. Now, in light of those principles, and that is then the second element of transformative constitutionalism, in light of that principles, systemic deficiencies in a society become apparent. And I think it's clear that we have issues of systemic deficiencies. But then there's a third element, and which is core to us lawyers. And that is a truly important step in legal thinking, because mostly these systemic deficiencies have been considered as just too big for the lawyers to address them. And that is still a reaction to those issues. But transformative constitutionalism says that these systemic deficiencies are not just political, to be addressed at the political side, they can also and should also be addressed by the legal system as legal problems, not least by the courts. So they won't solve the problem, but they can give a meaningful contribution. Now, what does that bring? And that are the three quick points by which I can then end. First, on a cognitive level. On a cognitive level, it adds the dimension of time and society. So in 2016, we thought, well, here's an attack, we fight it back, and then we return to the status quo ante. Now, what we see now that these systemic deficiencies are entrenched in society. And indeed, one might see that these systemic deficiencies are really an aspect that the transformation process that started in 1989 has not fully completed, and that it is that transformative process that needs to be carried on. So it is a much more societal perspective, and it's much larger in time, both going back and going forward, because we understand that transformative constitutionalism is a long-term project. So also on the effects, and that brings me to the second point, what the judgments have as an impact needs to be seen in that light. And that brings me to the second point, and that is on an evaluative level, it's overcoming the fixation on compliance. Very often when we look at court judgments, particularly of international and supranational courts, the focus is on compliance, whether they are complied with, and if they are not complied with, they have a deep problem of authority, and that means they have a deep problem to court. Now, transformative constitutionalism shows us that that's the wrong way to look at these decisions, because it is clear that when any institution, and in particular a court, addresses a systemic deficiency, there's just no point in expecting that there will be swift compliance. We are in a long-term process, and the effects and the merits of these judgments are to be seen in that light. Therefore, the courts should not be ridiculed if a government opposes them. And then on the last point, it's instrumental, and that means refining the instruments that are crafted by the political process, but also by the courts. And what we learned from Latin America is that these instruments need to be refined in a way that they strengthen civil society. And there a lot can be learned from Latin America, but we see that there a lot is happening, particularly in the association of judges. I referred you to Edith Seller. So that is how to look at it. And I think that ever more judges are looking at it that way. And here comes the breaking news. Yesterday, in the circle of the presidents of the European Council of Conference, yesterday met the circle of the presidents of the European Conference of Constitutional Courts. And in that meeting, our co-editor, Christoph Grabenwarter, who in the meantime has become the president of the Austrian Constitutional Court, as well as being a leading figure of the Venice Commission, he made a proposal. And the proposal is that at every meeting, of the European Conference of Constitutional Court, there should be a regular point on the agenda to discuss the independence of the courts that are meeting. That indeed looks to me very much like a contribution to a long-term project which is called Transformative Constitutionalism, and I think it might be interesting to continue working together in that light, and I'm very much looking forward to that. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. And again, congratulations to the editors and authors on this important book. And I now invite Dr. Adam Bodnar, the Polish ombudsman, as our first panelist for his reflections. Thank you for joining us today, Adam.
Thank you very much. I would like to welcome everybody and thank you for the chance to be part of this event. I would like to thank especially my deputy, Professor Maciej Taborowski, for being so much involved into the preparation of this book, but also cooperation with Max Planck Institute. And maybe I will start with those words stated by Professor von Bogdandy about defending checks and balances, because I represent basically one of the checks and balances institutions, the Office of the Polish Ombudsman, the institution with a long, over 30 years of constitutional tradition. And to be honest, because of the international pressure, because of a very specific character of the Polish constitution, I'm still in the office. My official term came to an end in September last year, but because there is no agreement between two chambers of parliament to elect the new ombudsman, I can still serve in this capacity, and I can still defend rights. I can still be a party to different proceedings, including proceedings before the Court of Justice of the European Union. So, and it seems to me that we shouldn't forget, that when we are talking about this attempt to dismantle constitutional democracy, that kind of institutions like ombudsman, they may also play an important role in securing rights and freedoms. Second point I would like to say is the current situation in Poland. We are in a very difficult situation. And with every month, with every week, this situation gets even worse. It is continuously deteriorated. The Supreme Court is almost taken over by people that would like to dismantle guarantees of judicial independence. The National Council of Judiciary is not any longer independent. The Constitutional Court is not only silent, it is quite aggressive in its policies, taking into account the recent judgment on access to legal abortion, judgment that is simply binding and that puts Poland into the basket of countries that are really not respecting women's rights. A number of independent institutions, those institutions that should be independent, are paralyzed and they cannot perform properly. And in practice, when we are thinking and we are talking about examples from Latin America, and Professor von Bogdandy made this comparison, in my recent paper, I have compared the situation in Poland to the system of competitive authoritarianism. So basically, I relied on this book and the theory by Stephen Levitsky and Lucan Way, comparing Poland to the system of competitive authoritarianism. What does it mean? It means that in the middle of the European Union, you have a member state in which you have all the democratic institutions, but they are becoming more like a facade. And the European Union is acknowledging silently that this change is happening. And of course, most probably we'll have parliamentary elections in 2023 in the same way as we had presidential elections last year, in the same way as we had elections to the European Parliament in 2019. But the question is whether those elections would be fair, whether all the system is created in such a way as to bring competitive advantage to the ruling party. And the question is how the European Union is going to respond to this challenge. And judicial independence is one of these elements of the system. I really respect highly Polish judges. They are trying to do their best in order to fight for their professional integrity and judicial independence. But I see that with every day it is becoming even more difficult. Moreover, sometimes by making brave actions, they are risking a lot. Moreover, they contribute to creating something what I would name a dual state. Just to give you an idea, even today we have example of this. Most probably everybody in this room knows the case of Judge Tuleya. Judge Tuleya, who has been suspended by this kangaroo court, which is disciplinary chamber of the Supreme Court. He has been suspended and his judicial immunity has been lifted. And quite interestingly, just today, just 2 hours ago, the appeal courts in Warsaw has decided to say that the disciplinary chamber is not court and that Judge Tuleya is still a judge and that his immunity has not been suspended. So it shows that in the legal system, you have already existing judgments that are conflicting with each other. And we have cases like this that are just coming with almost every day, almost every week. We have some examples of final cases that are not enforced. We have already problems at the European level in terms of execution of European arrest warrant. I mean here the judgment by the Karlsruhe Court, Landsgericht, or the judgment from the recent regional court in Amsterdam on refusing to make a European arrest warrant. I do hope that maybe up to 2023, the system will not change to that extent as not to have a chance for democratic elections, but I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure whether we'll be able. And here, upon this background, we should look into the practices of the European Union, because we treat European Union not only as some kind of foreign entity that is going to save us, but basically the entity which is part of our identity. When I was making my different scholar degrees, I was really reading a lot of Joseph Weiler's papers about European citizenship and about the value of democracy, about the European Union as the joint political community. And I have this misfortunate character that I remember what I have read and what I have studied and what I have believed in. And basically, that's why we would expect that European Union is doing more. And just to give you an idea, I remember 1 year ago, Wiera Jourowa was in Warsaw in order to protest against the adoption of the muzzle law, the law which is silencing Polish judges. And 1 year has passed, and this law is not even yet in the Court of Justice of the European Union. Or we have a interim measure concerning concerning the work of the disciplinary chamber of the Supreme Court. And despite this, disciplinary chamber is lifting judicial immunities from, and it has done it with respect to 2 judges. The other third one is also suspended because of some other reasons. So basically, I don't want to go into details, but I think that the question of time is of great importance here. The question of perseverance in fighting for rights and fighting for the respect of treaties. It is not the time for thinking about some new theory. It is a time for just simply complying with the EU law and putting pressure on those member states that are not complying with the EU law. And also it is a time about thinking not only about just judicial independence, but let's take freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is heavily restricted in Hungary. It is subject of a continuation of restrictions in Poland, and European Union seems to say it's not our business. It's not our matter of competence. If we think this way, then for sure you will have in the middle of the European Union authoritarian countries, and European Union basically will have to cope with not only the presence of those member states, but with its own future, with the continuity of this European project based on democracy, rule of law, and human rights respect. My last point is about the European Court of Human Rights. European Court of Human Rights proclaims itself as a conscience of Europe. You cannot be a conscience of Europe if you wait 2, 3, 4, 5 years for mere communication of cases that are submitted to this court. Cases of rule of law should be given priority because they are the backbone of the system. Without rule of law, you do not have any protection of rights. I see that with Professor Spano, with the new president of the court, there is more, let's say, dynamism in the operation of the court, but it's not about making some cases dynamic, but basically making those judgments to happen and to have impact on the reality in the background. And I say all of this because with respect to Poland, at least, European Union and international organizations might have everything what you could expect. You have a sympathizing Bear Association, non-governmental organizations, ombudsman, strong political opposition, strong press organizations. So you have all different national stakeholders that might be helpful for international organizations and the European Union to do the job. But the problem is that the European Union is not doing enough in these good political circumstances. So the question is, what would happen, or what may happen if you would not even have that kind of a good political environment supporting you in your cause? So I think it is extremely important not to talk just about theories of further development of democracy or constitutionalism, but simply about the enforcement of existing treaties, existing obligations, and supporting those who are fighting for democracy, rule of law, and that were patient pupils of Professor Joseph Weiler and other proponents of the European integration. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bodnar. I would like to take this opportunity also to thank you very much for cooperating with us in making possible this event today and hosting it. And I would also like to thank at this point the project Reconstitution at the Wissenschaftskolleg zu Berlin, the Berlin Institute for Advanced Study, who is also one of the co-organizers and co-hosts of today's event, represented by the academic coordinator Laszlo Detre. I welcome at this point also the viewers who are following us on Verfassungsblog and Völkerrechtsblog, and I would like to thank also these blogs for collaborating. But without further ado, I would now like to give the word on the panel, Professor Justyna Łacny from the Technical University in Warsaw.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be with you. And I will share with you a topic that I'm engaged for 2 years now. Adam Bodnar was saying that briefly, it's not a time for theory, it's time for action. And I will present to you what the EU thought might help to restore the situation, to defend the values, the rule of law in particular. I will speak about the rule of law conditionality, which was thought as maybe a mechanism that could improve the situation in those member states that are having, let's say, a systematic problems with respecting the rule of law. At the same time, the member states that are absorbing a lot of EU funds. Well, the rule of law conditionality was thought as one of the instruments that could restore the situation. However, it is rather a common opinion of the legal scholars that this rule of law toolbox is not a product of strategic engineering. That it's rather a collection of different instruments developed over the years that should safeguard the rule of law, and in different instruments were, let's say, accused, or the charges were that they are lacking a legal basis and they are not appropriate to restore the situation. Those arguments were also developed in the debate on the rule of law conditionality. So the basic logic was that maybe suspension of the EU funds could improve the situation in those member states. The conditionality is not a new instrument in the EU law. It was used at the very beginning in external relations, and from 90s also in internal relations to condition the access of the member states to the cohesion fund. As regards the rule of law conditionality, the debate was over 2 years. The Commission proposed its initial proposal in 2018. Then in 2019, the European Parliament brought its amendments, and we have, and this is the important point, we have the regulation right now, which was adopted in December 2020. This regulation is very short. This regulation contains only 10 articles, and 21 recitals, and is in force since 1st January this year. Well, what should happen? What should happen to initiate this rule of law conditionality? There has to be a link between the breach of the rule of law. At the same time, this breach of the rule of law must affect the EU budget, speaking generally. Well, as regards the protection, as regards this EU budget, it is not only the EU budget, but it's also the EU Recovery Fund. So this COVID instrument that should help all the member states to tackle this pandemic situation. And what is important as regards the financial matter is that the rule of law conditionality will only be can only be applied as to the expenditures that will be made in current multi-annual financial framework. It means it cannot be applied retroactively. So it will be only applied to the expenditures that will be made since January this year. We have the situation in which we have the definition of the rule of law. The definition is nothing. It's not new. It recalls to the current case of law of the Court of Justice, Article 2 TEU. So this is, let's say, the summary of this situation. What is important are the measures that can be implied on the member states that do have the story of breaching the rule of law. In public debate, this is usually stated that the conditionality is only about suspending the funds. Well, if we carefully read the regulation, we can easily have the not only the impression but also a belief that it can also lead to reduction of the funds, the reduction of the allocation that was agreed to be made available to the member states under the most of all of the agriculture and cohesion spending. What is important, there are legal criteria that will be applied to decide how those measures, being suspension or being the reduction or other measures, we have the legal criteria that will be applied how to adopt those specific measures. So on the one side, we have the breach of the rule of law. And on the other side, being seriousness, duration, recurrence, and so on. And on the other hand, we have the member states' approach to this breach. So in short, how they cooperate with institutions that are the main actors that are involved. As regards the procedure, so who is involved on the EU level? The initiation is always on the Commission side, so the Commission assesses the breach of the rule of law. There is let's say, dialogue with the member states. The procedure is very similar to the general infringement procedure. So there is a dialogue with the member states that can, of course, lead to ending of the procedure. However, if the member states will not provide the Commission with the findings that will let's say, prove that there are no problems, the Commission passes the draft decision to the Council, and this is the Council that takes the decision to adopt the measures on the member states. If the decision is made, of course, the member states can always go to the court to revise the decision. And let's say this is then the decision will be legally analyzed by the court. What is the impact of the member state? What is the impact of those measures? The impact is twofold. First, the measures can lead, as I already said, to the suspension of the transfers of the funds to the member states, but can also lead to reduction of the funds allocated. And on the second level, we always have beneficiaries. It means the farmers, local authorities, or others that can also be can also be impacted by the stops of the fundings. Well, what was introduced to the draft and what is right now in the regulation is a very important mechanism according to which member states must continue with the payments that they are transferring to the beneficiaries, despite the fact that they are not receiving the funds under the rule of law conditionalities. And what is important to say is that if the member states will not continue the payments, the Commission can initiate a second procedure in which it can stop the funding. So this is a mechanism that maybe will be able to effectively protect the beneficiaries. What can I say to conclude this very short presentation of this regulation? The important point is that we do really have this regulation in force, which was not obvious from the very beginning. We have strong, the European institutions have a very strong, let's say, instrument that they can use. The question is, as Adam Bodnar said, whether they would like to use it or not. There are legal criteria that define how this rule of law suspension can be applied. Beneficiaries are protected against illegal behavior of the member states, eventually stopping transfer of the funds. But the question that arises is whether this rule of law conditionality is not a typical European compromise in which strict rules are adopted to please the supporters, but they are never used to please the opponents. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Łacny. And our next speaker is now Professor András Jakab of Salzburg University.
Thank you so much, Alexandra, for the invitation. I would like to say a few words about what I think what we see in Eastern Europe is happening. So far, and also in the book, we have excellent analysis of what is actually happening. But I would like to give an insight into why I think it's happening. So what are the reasons? And I think the best description or explanation for the recent years, for the events of recent years in Eastern Europe, especially in Poland, in Hungary, but not only. I think it's important to see it's not only Poland and Hungary, but these are the probably two worst cases, is that we should understand that institutions consist of both formal and informal elements. And what happened is that at the end of the communism, these countries basically imported formal elements of constitutionalism, formal elements of the rule of law. They implemented it, but the informal elements, which are basically, to put it simple, cultural elements, or what is actually happening in society, they haven't changed as much, or they have changed, but they are not ingrained in the population. They are also not ingrained in the minds of many lawyers. So we can say that these countries in Eastern Europe, for the sake of EU membership, put up a mask. And now that we are member of the European Union, the mask is gone. So what you see in Poland and in Hungary is not some kind of unfortunate accident, but to a certain extent, I mean, these countries are very divided, but at least to a certain extent, what you see, that's the real Hungary and that's the real Poland. I think it sounds scary, but I think that's the best explanation that we can give for what is happening in this country. So formal elements have been changed, and informal elements have not been changed or just slightly. And after the external pressure went, and the external pressure was the wish to become a member of the European Union, after this external pressure disappeared, basically the real face of Eastern Europe can be seen. It's a bit like when 1,000 years ago Christianity was taken up in Eastern Europe. For a long time, actually for many centuries, like pagan reflexes came back in these countries, and I think this is one of the best metaphors, or one of the best explanations that you can have for what is happening in these countries. Of course, in the whole world, we have an emergence of populist and illiberal movements, but the reason why it is really badly hitting Eastern Europe is that the immune system of Eastern Europe is simply worse. And it's worse because the cultural elements have not been changed. I mean, after the Second World War, if we look for success stories, what we see in Eastern Europe, that's mostly today is obviously not a success story, but if you look for success stories in history, also in the 20th century, then we can say that after the Second World War, Germany and Austria and Italy and Japan were much more successful, but they were successful because they had foreign help. The foreign help was in the form of foreign occupation. In other countries, you have it's not just foreign occupation that can help, but some kind of strong foreign pressure is actually necessary in order to build up, with some exceptions, in order to build up a successful constitutional democracy. There are exceptions in history where it worked also without foreign pressure, but mostly you need some kind of foreign pressure or foreign help. So what I always try to use as a metaphor for these countries is metaphor of institutional alcoholism. Eastern European countries are alcoholics, institutional alcoholics, which means that they always slide back if there is no external pressure. There is hope in the long run, but not in the short run. In the long run, also these informal and cultural elements can be changed, like we have seen in Germany. Obviously, the culture of Germany has changed in almost in the last 70 years, but you need, so it's not just a couple of years, it's for many decades, you need effective foreign pressure that simply went by the fact that we became members of the European Union. And now the European Union needs to adjust. And we see various attempts, but sometimes, as Adam Bodnar said, I actually doubt whether really the political will is there on the side of the European Union, or at least on the side of certain Western European member states who apparently are very much appalled by what is happening in these countries, but in practice, they do not really want to rock the boat. I think also, if you want to understand why it's so difficult to describe with means of legal scholarship what's happening in these countries, is exactly with this twofold conceptualization, formal and informal elements of the rule of law is helpful. So if you have a look at Hungary, for example, then at the level of formal rules, you do have certain problems. And there are a few problems in statutes or even in the constitution, which you can pinpoint at, and where you can say, okay, this is something which is not in conformity with EU norms or principles of the rule of law, but where really the heart of the problem lies, that's not on the level of formal rules. Where the heart of the problem lies, that's more on the level of culture, of practices, what is actually happening. When you see that the police or the prosecution services are prosecuting certain people, but they are not prosecuting other people. If you are near to the government, then somehow they don't seem to prosecute you. And if you are critical of the government, then suddenly they over-prosecute you. And the rules are pretty much the same, the former rules, and also from the outside, it's much more difficult to see what's happening. You actually have to be on the spot. Or when we talk about, for example, it's a well-known example, the case of the Central European University, where on the level of former rules, you do have certain problems like the higher education law of Hungary, and that's actually also was judged by the European Court of Justice. But again, the main problem was not even just at the level of former rules, but how these rules were applied, how biased the application was, or how Hungarian politicians are talking about human rights standards as blah blah, or literally like blah blah, or that if they constantly express doubts about checks and balances, if important politicians of the government say that they don't believe in checks and balances, or they don't believe in human rights, it's not just mere rhetoric, but if it is normal in a discourse, then it will have consequences. It will have consequences if politicians say that they don't believe in human rights, that will have consequences indirectly on how the next time at a demonstration the policeman will hit you with his button. So I think these are the problems that are very difficult to catch as legal scholars. But these are the issues that lie at the heart, and I think that's what also Professor Bogdandy referred to as transformative constitutionalism. So certain cultural changes are necessary in these countries, and as long as those cultural changes are not there, you actually need a stronger support from the outside, or a stronger scaffolding for the building. Otherwise, the same things will happen. It's not just Poland and Hungary. If you have a look at what's happening nowadays in Slovenia, it's very similar. It's a similar playbook. But when I talk to friends from the Czech Republic and I ask them, so what's your secret why it hasn't happened there? They just tell me we were just lucky. It could happen anytime. I think that's important to understand also in the European Union and in foreign ministries of leading of important member states, especially in Berlin, that what is happening in these countries is not something that's happening overseas, but it's going to affect also these countries if they don't do something about it. And I hope that sooner or later, also political leaders will understand. So far, I think they haven't, unfortunately. But I hope that sooner or later, also political leaders in the European Union will understand the need for action. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now, as our last speaker, I would like to give the word to Professor Joseph Weiler, Professor of Law at New York University, and also Senior Fellow at Harvard's Minda de Gunzburg Center for European Studies. Professor Weiler, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Like Armin von Bogdandy, I want to start with the title, but with what's missing from the title, because it's checks and balances in the member states of the European Union, but it's not checks and balances in the European Union itself. And I think that's telling. And it's also telling in the way the discussion is taking place, because it's not even checks and balances in the member states of the European Union. And that's a reference to the discussion, but we single out a couple of member states, and then we enlarge it a bit. It's a problem of Eastern Europe, as if the problems we are facing here do not also exist in other member states in Western Europe. If the German Constitutional Court, a sober body with excellent jurists, issues a decision defying the European Court of Justice, we can't dismiss that as a technical error. Something very deep is going on for that court in that kind of decision to say something is not right in the way our affairs are being conducted. So I want to focus my words on problems of the European Union itself and some of the member states in the European Union itself, and not just go again and again, and isn't it awful what's happening in Hungary? It is awful. And nothing I say, I have to emphasize it, is a justification what's happening there. It's not if there are problems in the European Union with democracy, etc., that justifies what is happening in Hungary, etc. But I think we betray ourselves as intellectual. It's a form of trahison des intellectuels if it's so easy to find an easy target and not to do some introspective soul searching about our own institutions, about the European Union. Most people are, broadly speaking, favor European integration and see the noble dimension of that enterprise. So if I can just say something, what is happening in Hungary is terrible, but it's supported by a majority of the Hungarian people. Now, nota bene, the fact that it's supported by a majority of the Hungarian people, and I reject the explanation, it's not free elections, etc. That's Marxist false consciousness. If only they understood better, they wouldn't vote the way they did. They know what's going on. Orban is very clear about his policy, and he has a pretty solid majority, not only in parliament, but among the people. And let's look elsewhere. Salvini is the most popular leader in Italy. Marine Le Pen won the elections to the European Parliament. Marine Le Pen won the elections to the European Parliament. Vox is a rising party in Spain. And just think Brexit. How do we explain that? Now, the manifestations of this kind of populism are two. So again, I'm not justifying, it's really terrible. We should be concerned, but we have to do some kind of introspection and try and ask what's going on. Because if I look at the phenomena in the member states, the Salvini, the Marine Le Pen, etc., I just don't accept that over a period of 10 years, millions and millions and millions of Europeans suddenly became crypto-fascists. I say there has been a problem in our own liberal democracies which have pushed people to vote. It doesn't justify their vote. A democracy doesn't legitimate everything. A democracy of nasty people will be a nasty democracy. But we have to ask ourselves, what is it? Where have we contributed to this phenomenon? Which then Professor Jakab, I think, convincingly said, but it contributes to that culture without which. And if we don't understand that, the hopes of Armin for a constitutional transformation will be hopeless, because you don't have a constitutional transformation if there's not broad support in the population, if it seems to be imposed from outside. So the manifestations are two. There's a turning away from the broad support of the European integration, what was once part of the lunatic fringe on the right and the left. The Euroscepticism is now mainstream politics in many European countries. And in a turning away from the holy trinity of our liberal democracy. Let's start with the European Union because it's easier. I know that some people, maybe even some people sitting here, think that there's no democratic problem in the governance of the European Union. I think that is willful ignorance. The European Union suffers and continues to suffer from a profound democracy deficit. And I will explain it in 120 seconds. We have different democratic systems. The French is different from the German is different from the Spanish. But there are three principles without which we cannot say we have a truly functioning democracy. One is the principle of representation, where voter preference is translated into policy. So if you have a center-right parliament, you will have center-right policies. If you have a center-left parliament, you will have a center-left policies. The second is what the British call throw the scoundrels out. That if you're unhappy with the way you are governed, with the people who govern you, you can throw them out. That you have a decisive say in who will govern you. And the third is accountability, that political leaders and administration, they can be held accountable. And I'm not talking about corruption, stealing public money, appointing your cousin to a judgeship, etc. I'm talking about political accountability. Let's take, even with the best of will, nobody can say that the European Union has handled the vaccination issue perfectly. Will there be a political accountability for that at the level of the European Union? Let's get back to that. So if I take these three principles, the first one, we've had elections to the European Parliament since 1979. And since 1979, the powers of the European Parliament with every treaty amendment have been increased, but with the slight exception of the last elections to the European Parliament, the number of people who went to vote for the European Parliament has declined. And the gap between voting for the European Parliament and national elections remains high. How to explain that? The people know. It doesn't matter. My vote won't have a consequence in terms, I am not deciding on the political direction of the European Union. I'm not familiar, it might be my ignorance, I'm not familiar with a single study which shows a connection between voter preferences in elections to the European Parliament and the policies of the European Union. There's a disconnect. You don't feel, when you vote Christian Democrat or Social Democrat, etc., in your member state, when you vote Peace or Civic Platform in Poland, you know it will make a difference who wins the election. You don't have that feeling when you go vote for the European Parliament. At best, it's a proxy for national politics, but it doesn't have a major impact on the direction of the European Union. Do we get to elect the people who govern us? For example, the president of the Commission, and we heard today serious criticism of the Commission mishandling of violations of the rule of law in member states. We don't. The European Parliament, our democratic organ, decided that elections to the presidency of the Commission of the European Union will follow a certain procedure, the Spitzenkandidat. You might like it, you might not like it, but that was the voice of the European Parliament. And Mr. Macron and Mrs. Merkel just disregarded it and appointed, and I have nothing against her. I think she's a very able person. It wasn't the choice of the people. You and I, and I'm speaking as a European citizen, did not get any say in who would be the president of the Commission in the way we have to a much greater degree when we vote in our national elections. And when it comes to accountability, can you show me one instance, a single instance? I will invite you to the best restaurant in any member state of the European Union where there's been political accountability in the governance of the European Union. People have resigned, commissioners have resigned for cases of personal corruption. But for political failure, the Lisbon program, I can give you lots of examples. I am unaware of a single instance of political accountability at the level of governance of the European Union. Sometimes the government of a member state pays the political price. But there's, and again, following Mr. Jakab, if we look at the political culture of the institutions of the European Union, the fonctionnaires, etc., it's not a culture of accountability. It's not a culture of accountability. And members of the European Parliament, with all respect, they know that what they do or say or vote in the European Parliament will have no impact on their prospects of re-election. It will be determined by national politics. That's a problem. And then if we want to add our beloved European Court of Justice, I do not agree. I've critiqued in public the decision of the Bundesverfassungsgericht in the Weiss case. But don't you agree with me that what motivated them was a feeling that the European Court of Justice is not an effective guardian of the division of competences between the member states and the European Union, although in this case it was laughable. and that being an effective guardian of the competences in a system of delegated powers is a foundation of democracy in a federal structure. And won't you agree with me that indeed the European Court of Justice has not been an effective policeman of the jurisdictional lines of the European Union? Again, I repeat, this is not to say, well, because of that, then we can justify what's happening with checks and balances in those member states which have been identified. But we have to be just as vigilant and critical and think about the political culture that allows this continuous deficit in the way the European Union governed to go on as if nothing is wrong. Now, let's look at the politics of the member states as an explanation for populism. So we have beautiful liberal democracies, and I don't say this ironically. I really believe that. I'm old. But what's the but? There's a wonderful book by Peter Mayer, maybe 20 years ago, The Hollowing Out of Democracy. The differences between Christian democracy and social democracy are not that great. It does make a difference. Of course, it makes a difference. But there's one thing that they share. It's a notion that democracy is about redistribution. It's a materialist premise. So the center-left wants more progressive taxation, wants greater strength to the welfare state, etc. The center-right go more in a neoliberal tradition, neoliberal direction, although we don't have a real neoliberal government in our member states, but it's in that direction. So it does make a difference. But the common premise is that it's on prosperity that you get elected, that the responsibility of governments, apart from security, internal and external, is prosperity, increasing standard of living, etc. And that's what their main responsibility is. And they argue about that. More monetarist, less monetarist, more austerity, more growth, etc. There are two problems with, and that's the center of our politics in our member states. There are two problems with that. First of all, nobody can deny that the distribution of the desserts of globalization have been incredibly uneven in our member states. That although aggregate welfare has grown and aggregate prosperity has grown a lot, the distribution of that prosperity has been very problematic, and large segments of the population feel left out of that. And that might be a reason to turn one's back, not a justification, but a reason. And the second thing is the premise itself is faulty, because not on bread alone does man liveth. People are not only concerned in making life choices, like Clinton said, it's the economy, stupid. People look for various ways of giving meaning to their life. And that has not been a center or a concern of our politics, because our cherished values, human rights, democracy, and the rule of law are very, very important, but they are funny kind of value. Yes, we believe in democracy, but it doesn't tell us how we should govern. There can be a democracy of horrible people and a democracy of decent people. Human rights give us liberty, but they don't tell us how to exercise that liberty. I have freedom of expression to be a racist, to be offensive, to be terrible, but I'm protected by freedom of expression. So it used to be in the part that fascist politicians understood that. Mussolini, patria, chiesa, familia, a fascist version of patria, where the people belong to the state rather than the state belong to the people, authoritarian version, a patriarchal version of family, and a hierarchical version of chiesa. That disappeared after the Second World War. Nobody in Western Europe can say, I'm a patriot. You can only wave the flag in a football match. That gap is being filled in by some of the populist movements. And they are harking back to that very effective message, which was very effective in the 30s or 40s, but we haven't been competent to create a narrative of sane identity, not atavistic nationalism. of a community that, even if it's feel national, doesn't have to feel atavistic, etc., etc. We haven't replaced that narrative of meaning. And there the gap is filled. I've spoken too much, thank you.
Thank you very much. I see that we have already a number of questions in the chat. I now would invite the participants here in the Zoom meeting. If you have any questions, then please put just a one into the chat, and then I will take your questions to the panel. If you want to intervene just quickly, then we just enforce the 2 fingers rule that we have at the Institute. So you can just put a 2 into the chat if you have a direct intervention on one particular point in the discussion, but that should be brief. And I would like now to take the first round of questions. I see already a question by Professor Erika de Wet of the University of Graz.
Thank you, Alexandra, and for this most interesting panel, and greetings from a very springy Graz to everybody. Due to my socialization, I spent many years in South Africa. I was fascinated by many of the parallels between some of the developments in certain European countries, and also the difficulty in instilling democracy in African countries for very similar reasons, that Western models were transported into a system without taking sufficient account of the cultural challenges, and that society as a whole is limping behind, if I can put it that way. And very interestingly, the comment that you need kind of a strong external factor to stabilize the democratic values. Well, what is very disturbing in the African context, that external factor is increasingly China, which may not necessarily be the kind of stabilizing factor that from a liberal democratic perspective we would like to see. But now what I find very problematic also, Professor Weiler has pointed out many of the blind spots and the discrepancies and the double standards within the EU itself. But one issue which I think is being overlooked concerns also the impact of the conditionality on the external relations. I personally find it extremely risky, illegitimate and risky for the European Union to keep on imposing democracy standards in its external relations while it's having so many problems keeping its own house in order. Apart from the political implications, and that is disingenuous, you can't even clean out your own house and get basic democratic principles in your own member states in order, but you impose certain standards on other countries, and that I personally find that rather offensive. I find it's legally rather challenging. What if Canada, in light of the CETA agreement, would turn the tables around and one day say, we are going to suspend our trade agreement with the European Union because it's not living up to the conditionality, to the human rights standards, and these conditionality clauses are reciprocal. What then? What does that imply? Can they suspend legally? What would this legal standard be? Would it mean that the fact that there is some procedure in place to call Hungary and Poland and whichever other country to order suffice, or can one insist that the EU actually gets a result in that respect? I'm not sure that these issues have been thought through. And you see the double standards and this reflexes of, we have to cure the rest of the world of undemocratic practices, but without thinking of what these weapons will weapons in inverted commas will apply if the conditionality clause is actually being turned around and used against the EU. And to me also that just feeds into this culture of blind spots and double standards, and not having internalized how big the internal and layered the internal problem is. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have another question by Professor Tacik of the Jagiellonian University in Krakow.
Thank you very much. I would like to pose a question related to the concept of transformative constitutionalism, because I very much agree with Professor von Bogdandy. Of course, it's a better approach than this sort of compliance-centered approach that we used to applied previously. But my concern is that transformative constitutionalism is a concept that works well in case of authoritarian regimes that are making the transition to democracy, and in which case there is some kind of zeitgeist, one would like to say, in favor of liberal democracies. But right now, we are just witnessing perhaps a sort of a different phenomenon, the one that has been described in a wonderful article by Tom Gerald Daly, with a whole catalogue of terms like rotting, decay, decomposition. So I wonder whether we can apply the concept of transformative constitutionalism to the relation in which it is the liberal center that is trying to defend itself against some kind of, one might say, corruption, attack, onslaught from far right and authoritarian trends, rather than the other way around. So I would wonder how we can apply this concept nonetheless. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have another question by Professor Daniel Inerarity of the University of the Basque Country and the UI in Florence.
Thank you, Alexandra. My question is to Professor Weiler. Don't you think that the model of democracy according to which there would be a European Union deficit is too dependent on that, by the way, it doesn't work at all, or absolutely completely in the member states either? Should we not think of democracy in the EU in a more unique and innovative way, with a different approach to concepts like representation, participation, people, demos, or accountability? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before giving the panel a first chance for a round of responses, I would like to give the word to Matthias Schmidt of the University of Warsaw.
Yeah, hello, I don't know if you can see me because I can't turn my video on.
No, but just continue with your question, okay. We hear you.
Oh, now I can turn it on. Okay, now it works, thank you. I would have two questions related to rule of law spending conditionality mechanisms. So I think I would address those questions mainly to Professor Justyna Łacny, who wrote also a very interesting chapter in the book on the legality of the Commission's proposal on the rule of law conditionality. And my first question would be quite general about those spending conditionalities that we have already in EU secondary law, mainly in structural funds. And the question is whether the question of compatibility of those conditionalities has ever been directly addressed by the Court of Justice of the European Union, and I mean the compatibility with the treaties. And my second question relates specifically to this recently adopted rule of law conditionality regulation. And the question I'd like to ask is not about a legal basis, but about a misuse of powers, which is another ground of review under Article 263 in Action for Annulment. Because this misuse of powers means that an act can be annulled by the court when an act was adopted by the institutions with an purpose other than the one that is stated, formally stated, and for which the power has been conferred. So there's not a question about a legal basis, but about using a correct legal basis, but for the other purposes that this legal basis has been created. So the question, my question is that even assuming that there is indeed a correct legal basis for this regulation, which is Article 322 of TFEU, then the purpose of this article is solely the protection of your financial interest. So I'm just curious, what would you think about challenging this regulation, not on the basis of the lack of legal basis, but under this misuse of powers grant, by claiming that the EU legislature actually was seeking to fight against rule of law backsliding in member states by misusing legal basis, which is to protect EU financial interests. So that would be my second question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I now would invite the panel for first round of responses, and I would like to start in the reverse order with Professor Weiler first, and then András, and so on. And I think we will have then time for a second round of questions as well. So if you have comments or questions, you can still continue to indicate so in our chat. Professor Weiler, if you would like to start responding.
Thank you. So I will respond to the question, very serious question by Professor Innerarity. And I'll use this occasion to recommend one of his books, a wonderful book about cooking. It's really a thrilling book, very appropriate for the time of COVID. So I agree that the European Union is not a state and should not be a state. It's not even a federal state. So we have to think differently about the modalities of democracy. But I don't think we can change the criteria of democracy. So for example, demos. And if there's no demos, there's no democracy. If we told the Canadians today, you just become part of the United States, you can vote, you can be elected, etc., they will say, thank you, but no thank you, because we are Canadian and they are Americans. If we said to the Danes, become part of Germany, a model democracy, you will have all the rights guaranteed by the German constitution, etc., they will say, thank you, but no thank you. We will feel that we Danes are ruled by Germans. So demos in the word democracy is not just a lexical thing, it's an ontological thing. But in the European Union, we can think of demos in a different way to the way we think about it in the member states. The demos of the European Union should not be a kind of organic demos with ethnic and etc. It's a community of values. And that's what gives thickness, or could or should give thickness to the European demos. And that's a criteria of demos, or a factor of demos, which is different in some of our member states, where the understanding of what it means to be Polish or what it means to be Italian, etc., have a whole range of factors. The union should be a community of values. That's why I'm against, I never favored the European flag and the European anthem, etc., because just like Professor Innerarity, it's just borrowing from notions of demos and democracy from the member states and not realizing that the European Union is different. I don't think you can have a democracy if you don't have representation of the people. We can't have the direct democracy in a polity of 420 million or whatever it is. But just to give you an example, was it a wise thing to move away from the original model of the European Parliament, where there were members of national parliaments who were at the same time members of the European Parliament? And everybody was so thrilled at the time by direct elections, but maybe something is lost. Maybe the modality of representation should be different, where people who are making decisions in their national parliaments should also be the same thing, or at least a large number of them, also members of the European Parliament. I'm not sure that I agree with the modality of the Spitzenkandidaten, but that somehow the people should have a decisive say by whom they will be governed and have the possibility to throw the scoundrels out. I think if you don't have that, we can coat it with sugar, but we're not talking about a functioning democracy. So I agree with Danielle Innerarity that we can't just borrow the institutions and practices of the member states and fit them onto the European Union. We have to look for alternative modalities, but I don't think we can dispense with the criteria.
Thank you very much. I would like to continue with András Jakab.
Thank you so much. I would like to share an optimistic thought with you, because I think my short intervention or contribution was probably, it sounded very pessimistic. So I try to be optimistic now. And I would like to emphasize that culture can also change. So you can change a legal system, you can change the formal rules within 1 or 2 years, or maybe 3 years in a country, this successfully, but you cannot change the culture that quickly. But in the long run, it can also change. It just takes several decades or 1 or 2 generations, but it can change. What you need is that in the meantime, you need some support. In the meantime, where it is still fragile, the institutions are still fragile because of the uncertainties on the cultural level. You need support, and the support is not necessarily a foreign, like a direct foreign intervention. It can actually also be a certain fear from a foreign intervention. If you have a look at the Baltic states, basically in former socialist countries, the only countries where the rule of law is basically okay, or actually in the last couple of years, if you have a look at rule of law indices in Estonia, it's even getting better than before, but also in Latvia and Lithuania, they are pretty much in good shape. And the reason for that is the fear of Russia. So they are afraid of Russia, and they build their identity on westernization, and by westernization they also mean liberal democracy. So that's also a type of foreign intervention. So it doesn't necessarily need to come from the side of the European Union. It does seem to work. There in the other countries, it doesn't seem to work. If you have a look at rule of law indices, then you see that everywhere in Eastern Europe, it's very slowly getting worse. In Poland and in Hungary, it's rapidly getting worse. So culture can change in the long run with the help of some external pressure. But at the same time, you also need smart legal work. So you do need good, smart constitutional rules. Also, in what happened in Poland and in Hungary, it has a component or an element of bad constitutional design, and bad constitutional design combined with the cultural problems led to the situation, in my understanding, in both countries. So if we want to get out of this situation, then we need external help, and we need smart constitutional design for the future, so we don't have such backslide. Basically, what happened in Germany also, very smart constitutional design in the Grundgesetz, and some external help. So I would say that the naivety of the 90s is over. So this liberal democracy is not automatic if you let the countries do what they automatically would do, but the job is doable. So you can establish also and you can stabilize, I think, liberal democracy in former socialist countries. But it's important that that politicians, especially in the European Union, decision makers and in Western European countries, actually recognize that they actually need to do something about it, and they don't consider it as some kind of faraway foreign problem or overseas problem. So it's possible they don't really care about what's happening in Saudi Arabia, but they should care about what's happening in Warsaw and in Budapest. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, a strong plea for a democratic mission or missionarism. Thank you very much, András. And I would like to invite Professor Łacny for response on the panel.
Thank you very much for the question. As regards the conditionalities that we have in the EU law, as I mentioned, the EU has a quite a long history of imposing conditionality provisions in the EU law, starting from 1984, where the access to the cohesion fund was made conditional upon the member states' respect of the budgetary procedure, budgetary rules, and in the previous multi-annual financial frameworks, there were some provisions also regarding conditionality, and we can in fact we can divide those provisions. They were included in the agricultural provisions and in cohesion regulations. We can divide those conditionalities in two groups. One is let's say, financial conditionality, according to which member states must respect certain rules concerning, let's say, financial requirements as regards, for example, checks, imposing sanctions, or, for example, respecting the public procurement. If those obligations are not respected, if the member states do not perform relevant checks, if they don't impose sanctions on the people that are abusing the EU funds, if, for example, the member states do not have relevant national law that properly implements the public procurement directives, then the Commission is authorized to suspend EU funds, but not only to suspend, but also to cut the funds. So this is the, let's say, the financial conditionalities. But we also have a second group of conditionality provisions, which is not related with the financial requirements, but with, let's say, other. And one of the famous one is the anti-discrimination provisions. If member states do not respect EU discrimination regulations, also the funds might be suspended. Those conditionalities are usually let's say, they are normally used in regular turnover, particularly these financial conditionalities. And until now, the member states did not question, did not initiate any procedure concerning those conditionalities, so the Court of Justice did not have opportunities to rule on those requirements. The second question was related to misuse of powers and proper legal base. Those two questions, those two problems are related, quite related with each other, because well, we can speak about the misuse of powers in the context if we find that the EU institutions did not have relevant legal base. I would just like to remind that the regulation was based on Article 322, which is not dealing expressis verbis with the protection of the EU financial interest, but with the management of the EU funds. So this is a wider content, and we have to remember the institutional framework in which the EU budget is operating. It means that the Commission is, as we all know, is the guardian of the EU treaties, but also the Commission is responsible, according to the treaty, Article 317, the Commission is responsible for the EU budget. So I would say if we have the international organization with institutions and with the EU and with the institutions and with the common funds included in the budget, we have to have someone responsible how the funds are spent. So I would say, if according to the treaty, this is the Commission who is responsible, I don't really see a problem. I don't really see a problem that this institution should have authority, should have the competences to defend this budget. So I would say quite opposite. It will be quite problematic if there will be a responsibility put on the Commission to be the guardian of the EU budget, but with no enforcement instrument provided. So what can be problematic is, but that was the political decision, is that this is not at the hands of the Commission, who is, as I said, legally responsible for the EU budget, but the decision is the decision to use the conditionality, the rule of law conditionality, is at the hands of the Council. So if there's maybe if there might be the discussion about the question, I would not go to the direction of misuse of powers, but who would be in the position to better defend the funds, I would say. I'm questioning myself that probably maybe it was not the best solution to put it at the hands of the political body instead of the body who is legally responsible for the EU budget and also for the respect of the rule of law. So I hope that answers the question of Mr. Przemysław Tacik.
Thank you very much. I would like to give the floor now to Dr. Bodnar.
Thank you very much. There was no particular question to me, but I would like to just say a few words about maybe something constructive in terms of what we can do, because it's quite interesting that until this moment, we didn't mention the very important thing that happened in the international arena, which is the presidential elections in the United States. Why those elections do matter? Because thanks to the presidency of Joe Biden, there is a chance, maybe it is a window of opportunity for coming back to basics, to why the US-EU transatlantic alliance matters, why multilateralism, including operation at the United Nations level, do matter for the promotion of democracy all over the world, why it is important to refer to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and international human rights treaties. And it seems to me that it is not just window of opportunity for the world, but it is also a window of opportunity for scholars, because maybe it is our task these days to think about what could be our role in this changing political environment. Maybe it is the question about how to reinvent democracy, how to promote civic participation with existing legal tools, how to bring more awareness to the general public, and how to raise awareness like in this way as Joe Biden did on 7th of January. Why do institutions matter in terms of providing accountability and checks and balances? So maybe this new situation in the world is giving us a chance for rethinking our role as scholars, and also by proposing different instruments at national level, at the EU level, but also at the international level, in order to repair our democracy, in order to maybe reinvent some of its fragments, and thus to contribute to building better, more aware demos, as Professor Weiler has mentioned this word. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this striking memento. And I would like to continue now with Piotr Bogdanowicz and then Armin von Bogdandy.
Thank you very much, Alexander. Just one comment in relation to two papers or two speeches by Adam Bodnar and András Jakab, because Adam focused on the pressure that EU institutions should impose on Polish or Hungarian governments in order to increase the chance to restore the rule of law in this member states. And I do agree with Adam, because of course our last experiences show very much that only such pressure may be taken into account by at least Polish government. And then there is a question, Adam, maybe there's a question to you. You've been discussing these issues with Vera Jourova many times, and with the European Commission representatives. do you think that this is, I mean, no new measures is right now such a lack of political will, which now is over legal issues, or this is something more? And here I refer to the speech by András, that simply the European Commission and other EU institutions say, please do. I mean, what they are saying to Poland or Hungary, please do start the changes from yourselves. So please do change, as András said, your culture, and then we will intervene. Does it mean that such interventions will be more raw than in the past? Then we will get back to the state of play before 2016 or 2017. What's your view on that?
Would you like to respond directly? Briefly? Maybe András first and then Adam Bodnar.
Yeah, so just very shortly, I do not think that you know, just I don't know, Hungary and Poland are the rotten apples, and everywhere else in the European Union things are working perfectly, especially not in the European Commission. Basically, the Commission, whenever they start infringement procedures, they have a discretion whether they launch the infringement procedure or not. And very often they are deciding on pragmatic, or I would even say opportunistic grounds. One example is, like a well-known example in Hungary, is the new nuclear plant. It's in Paks. There will be a second nuclear plant built by Russia, basically, and that it was very clear that it's at certain points it is not in conformity with EU rules. And basically what happened, they started the negotiations, and then suddenly it was leaked out that also Siemens is receiving certain parts of the business, and then suddenly the Commission changed this position, and then they stopped the whole infringement procedure. And this big project is actually like a large or a major possibility of corruption for the government, also through Russian money. So it's not just Hungary and Poland, but obviously, you know, you also have, instead of coming from the European Union, the pressure of anti-corruption, actually also corruption is coming from the European Union in this way, which is very disappointing. Actually, it's frustrating if you see it from the inside. So yeah, I think I agree.
Thank you. Adam Bodnar?
I think the answer to the question by Professor Bogdanowicz goes a little bit in line with what Professor Weiler suggested, because it seems to me that if the European Union would have the policy of its own regarding being the guardian of treaties, and basically it would apply those principles in line with those with this very basic principle, then most probably we wouldn't have that much of a problem. Because, for example, you know, I believe that Věra Jourová is really believing strongly in values of the rule of law, judicial independence, also taking into account her personal experiences. But at the end of the day, it is the European Commission that must do the job. The president of the Commission, and the college of the whole Commission. And then what I always remembered, you know, over the last of those years was always statement like this: we must ask capital cities. We must check what capital cities are doing. And if capital cities are interested mostly in preserving the car industry in Hungary, then maybe the answer is then no, we will not do any action, or maybe we'll end to this moment when CEU is already expelled from Vienna, or when NGOs are already frozen as regards their activities. And it seems to me that also over the last year, I think the major point was presenting all those different initiatives like rule of law report in order just to cover up lack of willingness to take like a real action, because most probably capital cities were not interested. So if we support European integration by investing into the legitimacy of the European Parliament, into the legitimacy of the whole European project, that maybe European Union would have much more force and would not be so much dependent on the wishes and expectations of different capital cities, because at the end of the day, as a result of this problem, we are facing that kind of difficulties. And it seems to me that this so-called authoritarian equilibrium has been described by Professor Kaleman as one of the sources of problems for the European Union, in terms also of checking the status on the rule of law in different member states. Thank you.
Sorry, just a very short intervention. I think it's a common misunderstanding that the European Union could not do anything in these cases. And the European Union could do much more. It's just a political willingness is lacking. That's the truth.
Yeah. But what I mean is that this political willingness was to great extent steered by the CSU party and lack of any interest of CSU to have stronger interventions with respect to Hungary. That's my point.
Yeah.
And you know well that there is this website index.hu that has described this connection between German car industry and the internal and the politics at the EU level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like now to give room for the 3 remaining questions or comments that we have, and ask you to be very brief, our speakers from the floor. And then we have time for very short final statements or final sentence by the speakers before Armin von Bogdandy then will present concluding remarks, so that we can then conclude about 5 minutes after the hour, because we also started a bit late. I hope that is suitable to everyone. I have now on the list Professor Rajo of Helsinki University, Daniel Inararity, and Anna Zilinska. Professor Rajo.
Thank you indeed. I'm Juha Raitio from the University of Helsinki and Professor of European Law. I try to be very brief. We have discussed a lot about European democracy today, and I don't want to underrate the issue of democratic deficit within the EU structures, but I think that there is also an important aspect to point out, bearing in mind that this book is about defending checks and balances, and it is about rule of law and the concept of rule of law. There are many who think, especially in populistic parties, not only in Poland and Hungary, but also elsewhere, that the rule of law does not actually mean anything, that it is just a rhetorical balloon. Even, for example, Professor Åke Fredberg from Sweden pointed this out back in the 90s, that it is just a rhetorical balloon. But I think that this is a bit dangerous idea in a way, because if it turns out to be so that member states tend to define a rule of law all by themselves, this is a way how to circumvent Article 2 of the Treaty of the European Union, in which the value basis of European liberal democracy has been mentioned, namely this triangle or tripod of democracy, human rights, and rule of law. So the question will be, is it so that the member states of the European Union should rely on Article 2 and the value basis it represents? Thank you.
Daniel Inararity.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is a little humble replic to Professor Weiler. What I am proposing is that the true nature of the European institutions, or the European Parliament that you have just mentioned should be invented without imitating the model of the national parliaments. For example, without trying to replicate there the antagonist government opposition or left-right, or without insisting that it should be an institution of control of the Commission. It could even happen that, freed from these functions, Parliament could adopt an original form, more deliberative than of control and antagonism. In this sense, the figure of the Spitzenkandidat is a fully inappropriate one, in my opinion, an instrument of direct democracy rather than mediated or complex democracy. Its consequence has been that as soon as the Commission has had to be negotiated, its effectiveness has been null, and they have had to seek more constructed, less direct agreements. What I am proposing is that we should explore forms of indirect democracy instead of considering democracy as a system of political organization in which people act immediately. In this sense, finally, we could even talk about democratization of the European Central Bank, for instance, without compromising its nature and functions. For example, there should be a discussion about certain criteria. I am speaking about criteria that can make it more democratic, not in terms of electoral democracy. Plurality and diversity of the members, better representation of the women, impartiality, autonomous budget, the right to be listened to by parliaments, the right to appeal and jurisdiction to make decisions. One can talk about democratization based on the opening of debates about the mission and mandate, increasing publicity in such a way that we can get to know differences of opinion and assure their social and political representativeness. In sum, these are all democratic criteria, but adapted to the nature of institutions that could be democratic in a different dimension than the nation states. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last question slot goes to Professor Anna Zielinska of the University de Lorraine in Nancy and Sciences Po in Paris.
Lovely to see you all here. Thank you so much, Alexandra, for the slot. So just a quick question that I asked already in the chat, and I think that's, I mean, sorry for being naive, but the psychology of Eastern Europeans, of the boomers generation, is a very particular psychology. And I think that it's, what is going on, the crisis of democracy in this area is, I think, caused by something different than crisis of democracy in other areas of the world. And as much as, you know, we just got some hope from the US, we saw that demographic has changed completely the face of politics in the US during the last few months. So I was just wondering to what extent we could hope maybe that something like this will soon happen in Eastern Europe. Thanks.
Thank you. So now I would like to challenge our panelists to a short 1-minute concluding statement before then Armin von Bogdandy offers some conclusions. And I would like to start with Professor Weiler.
No, I believe in the rule of law, and we said it would end at 4 o'clock. So it should end at 4 o'clock or at 6 o'clock, whatever it is.
András, Jakab, please.
Well, I just basically a short reply to the last question. I would be rather pessimistic about it, as we can see in Eastern Europe, many from the younger generations are actually leaving the country. So especially those who could demographically make a difference are already sitting in Western Europe, like myself in Austria, but many others, the tens of thousands, actually hundreds of thousands in Germany or the United Kingdom. So I think that's a very rosy picture that was reflected in the question. I just don't believe in that, unfortunately.
Thank you. Adam Bodnar?
Using this time, I would like simply to thank Max Planck Institute for this great cooperation over years. And it is my great pleasure to say that we could count on you and we could cooperate on a number of in number of situations, in number of articles, and that thanks to our cooperation between Polish scholars, my institution, but also Polish academia, we could have really direct impact on number of developments. Maybe the situation could be even worse in Poland, if not that kind of methods of cooperation. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you very much. Professor Łacny?
Yes, I can join to Bodnar's words. It's a very important sign to us, to Polish academia people, that we can count on you, and I hope that this cooperation will develop and we can have a real impact on what's going on in the situation of the rule of law. I have fears that the situation will not improve in the nearest future, and also I see, because many voices, there were many voices in this debate that we hoped that the EU the EU institution will try to improve the situation. This is not happening. And also in the area that I'm dealing with is the rule of law conditionality. I have fears that it will be a political decision, not legal decision, whether to initiate this instrument or not. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Piotr Bogdanowicz?
I have nothing to add. Many thanks for this seminar. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Armin von Bogdandy.
Yeah, thank you very much for your participation. Coming to the end, I want to respond to two questions. The first is to Professor Tacik, whether transformative constitutionalism is an appropriate frame to look at issues, and to say, well, it looks like something that starts in a hopeful moment. But I think it is very important to read the events, or at least I try to look at it in that way, that the events that we are looking at in Central and Eastern Europe, that is something that not started in the 2010s, but it started in 1990. We have to see it in the long run, and then it really is parallel to the development in Latin America, which also started in the 1990s. And we had a first phase of transformative constitutionalism in Central and Eastern Europe, which was, however, very bureaucratic in the 1990s. And I think we need to learn from the failures of the project at the time to continue with transformative constitutionalism in the future. And I think that the Polish office of the Ombudsman is a shining light how to do that. Then the last question with respect to Erika de Wet. Yes, indeed, the EU might be hypocrite if it tries to enforce the values against third countries and is not doing it in its own country. And it needs to do so, not only not to be hypocrite, but to remain what it is, its self-understanding as a democratic polity. And I underline how important it is that we understand it in that way. The European citizens have opted with the Lisbon Treaty for a model of constitutional democracy that certainly does not respond to many of the ideas that have been developed with respect to constitutional democracy, but that is what they have opted for. And of course, we have to criticize the Union, and there's much to criticize, but there's one thing that we need to see, that the Europeans have more trust in the European Union that they have in their national governments and national institutions, and that the Europeans are more satisfied with the democracy of the EU than with the democracy in their home countries. So somehow the European Union has managed to convince many citizens that it is a workable model of democracy, more than many domestic systems are doing. And I think on that we can build and go with András, Jakab, that there is the legitimacy for the Union to put up more pressure to defend all Union citizens, even particularly those in a difficult situation as those in Poland. And I'm very happy to continue cooperating in that way. Thank you very much for your cooperation, and see you soon in a different setting. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much for making time today. Thank you to the panelists and to everyone who joined and watched today's Heidelberger Salon. I think the dynamics of this conversation and also the fact that we were running out of time at the end shows the urgency of this debate, and it will be continued at the Institute and also in many venues throughout Europe. And with these words, I would like to conclude this seminar. Thank you very much and have a great weekend, everyone. Bye-bye.